Welcome to Classics Confidential. I'm Anastasia, and today I'm talking to my Open University colleague Dr Paula James about a new book she's got coming out. Paula has done a lot of work on mythical figures on screen, and she has brought out a great book on the reception of the myth of Pygmalion, which is now out in paperback. But she's got a new exciting project called The Art and Ideology of the Trade Union Emblem 1850 to 1925. This is a forthcoming book, and she's here today to talk to us about it. So, Paula, what drew you to this exciting project?
Well, actually, it was teaching at residential school many years ago when I first arrived in the Open University, and the introductory arts module was a Victorian Britain focused one, and I was told I was teaching culture. So after the blind panic of the thought of teaching culture in the 19th century, I saw that within that block there was some absolutely fascinating material on the trade union banners and certificates of the newly emergent unions, the organised, mostly then skilled workforce. Now, I knew about banners because I'd been on Tolpuddle marches every summer, and I knew about the Durham Miners' Gala, so I knew how beautiful some of these banners were and quite how elaborate they were and what kind of history they had, but I had no idea how much classical material was in them, in terms of figures, gods, abstract representations, women who were truth and justice, suitably classically garbed, architectural structures and motifs were very prominent in the certificate designs and in the banner designs, sometimes the odd Latin motto. So I got absolutely intrigued and thought, this is a research project, and that's how it began.
It's actually a collaborative project. You've been working with a wonderful collaborators, so tell us how that came about.
I really have the genuine article, the amazing Dr Ravenhill-Johnson, who I found out about by, I got hold of the People's History Museum to go and have a look at the banners in Manchester, where I was living at the time, and they told me about Annie, and we got in touch, and we started to do the odd joint presentation together. I discovered that Annie, who was a mature student and had started in the OU actually, was just an incredible art historian who'd really specialised in the banners and the certificates and their designs. She'd looked at the representations of the female in them, she'd looked at the long history of Freemasonry and friendly society emblems that really influenced the early banners and certificates very much. So she just knew about everything, although she too has discovered an awful lot more. And the bulk of the book is really Annie, 10 incredible analytical chapters. I know I'm getting very effusive here, but I am just so impressed with the work she has done. And I've been like driving the project through, and I've edited the chapters to a certain extent, and also done an introduction and then a conclusion, weaving in the more classical perspective and the perspective of reception, because we really don't have an awful lot in classical reception about the labour movement of the 19th century's use of classical symbols in art. We're aware of it in literature, perhaps, but not the visual side.
Yes, indeed. It was something that I was fascinated when I heard that you were working on this, because I thought, oh wow, how exciting. This is something that we don't know very much about. So that's a wonderful approach, and it does show that reception projects can have a really wide outreach. Talking a little bit more classics, I noticed that you do discuss the figure of Hercules a fair bit in the book. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Hercules figures very prominently, or we assume it's Hercules, the jury's always out on these things, but a muscular, heroic figure is very much at the centre of a big banner produced by the dockers in their struggle for the tanner, for a guaranteed, well actually against the casualisation of labour in the docks in the 1890s. Many of the workers were starving in London because it was really almost at a whim they could be taken on for work for a day or not. So this was, you know, for a guaranteed daily wage. It was a very big struggle. And their banner, with the figure of Hercules right in the centre, strangling or wrestling with, we have to say perhaps wrestling with a snake, a python, is a very stark image, and it's a sea change from previous banners and certificates, which were a lot more elaborate, and one has to say a lot more reassuring about we are combining for peaceable purposes, for insurance, for paying for funeral clubs, all these kinds of things, but also for a living wage. And they did like to promote the worker as an heroic figure and perhaps link him to the gods on a pyramid structure. Very, very influential certificate design is James Sharple's in the 1850s for the newly amalgamated engineering union. So what I'm trying to emphasise by giving you that little bit of background is this sudden stark, rather almost crude artistic image of a Hercules figure in the Dockers banner is something quite different, and it looks much more confrontational, and it actually has emblazoned at the bottom about sweeping away destitution, prostitution. The serpent is really like the serpent of capitalism, and it's all about, you know, the workers' struggle for their rightful place and for a decent wage in that particular era. And it's, of course, the unskilled worker that we're talking about now forming into unions. But the Hercules figure's a bit of a problem anyway, because it does get used a bit in the French Revolution and then kind of abandoned, because he's very much associated with an aristocratic symbol.
Indeed. I mean, there is the paradigm that classics is elitist, which, you know, your work wonderfully problematizes and shows that there is another aspect of the discussion that we need to engage with. So that's wonderful.
So with all of Annie's chapters looking at so many influences on the artistic design of the banners and the certificates, primarily the certificates, in my conclusion I ended up almost doing a little mini case study of Hercules, because Annie had discussed this banner, but I felt there was an awful lot more for classicists to do with it. There's still more to be done. There is the sequel. There's always the sequel. Although I think Annie and I are so exhausted that might not be us, or it might not happen for some time. But really, Hercules began to fascinate me, because I thought, well, he's kind of locked into a gaze with the serpent, and Annie actually argues very persuasively that this picture of Hercules and the serpent is very much modelled on athletes struggling with a python, which was a bronze sculpture which rather took the art world by storm in the 19th century by Lord Leighton.
Yes.
And there was some worry, is this figure actually defeating the serpent? Because the serpent represented all kinds of negative things in terms of something that's folklorist, something that's pagan, and Hercules had been adopted as a kind of elitist muscle man, representing all kinds of aristocratic virtues.
And the civilising...
the civilising Hercules.
aspect of his nature.
Although one has to say that in works by labour historians on the 19th century docks and the conditions of the workers, one does have descriptions of, say, the coal heaver as like a Hercules, because he had to be so strong, so physically adept in order to carry out his work. So he was a powerful figure. I mean, sadly, did not have immortality. They usually were spent by about the age of 40, these men who were coal heavers, or coal porters as they're sometimes called. So Hercules is representing the muscle and the power of the dockers. He's strangling the serpent, maybe of capitalism there, and so he's got all kinds of civilising and cleansing associations as well. We think of cleansing the Augean stables, and of course we're talking about, you know, workers at the wharf side, at the docks. We're talking about something that's really to do with the sea and water anyway, so he's a very good symbol.
Fascinating. This explores the impact of classics on the political life of Britain, really. Thank you very much, Paula, for a fascinating talk, and we look forward to the book.
Yes, please read it.